So I know we're going to have a really interesting conversation, and we'll just jump right in. I think, EC, I'll start with you. She is our EVP and COO of Beauty and Personal Care at Unilever North America.
Ow! Guys, we need some energy, so you're going to hear lots of come on, look.
We're also crazy when we get together.
Yes.
Wait, is this
I know these
you and
people
me?
know each other too.
Okay.
I know there's going to be no shortage of conversation. But she leads the multi-million-dollar beauty and personal care portfolio, overseeing just a few small brands that become a part of our culture, like Dove and Axe, as well as working with the newly acquired startups like Shea Moisture and Schmidt's Naturals, which are part of Unilever's $100 million fund for women of color entrepreneurs. Her career began at Procter & Gamble and took her to Coty, and she led CoverGirl to be the first cosmetics $1 billion retail sales brand. Awesome. So actually, I'll start off with a question for you in terms of one of the things that we talked about was that you're working closely with Richelieu Dennis. And what are some of the things that you've learned from him about the commitment of a founder to their value proposition?
Oh my God, there's so much I could say. That's not a short, easy question. She said, keep your answers short. And then she asked this really big questions. What have I learned from Rich? Rich is the
Well,
founder
just about the relentlessness.
Okay. Is the founder and creator of Sundial Brands, and the one that is most recognized is Shea Moisture, which is amazing. It's, $250 million in sales. And it's been going for almost 30 years, and a lot of people don't realize that. And it is a love mark in our community. And he is short of brilliant. So there's tons of things that I've learned from him. And technically, it's always interesting, he technically works for me, but I feel like I work for him. And quite frankly, I work for all of our founders. Because what really is interesting, and the notion of this panel to me that is interesting, is today, there are no barriers to entry in any of the businesses that we're in. So it creates an equal playing field. And what that means is the paradigms and frameworks and constraints in which we used to approach brand building and business are no more. And we see all these opportunities and brands and businesses thriving because we see there are different ways. And in the end, people vote. People vote. So the most important thing that I've seen, and also have learned from Rich, it's not about what my business perspective thinks an opportunity is. It's about the unique opportunity a founder sees, and with commitment and passion, unrelentlessly brings that to life. And it's my goal to fully understand that and what the unique value proposition is, and this is another very important point. Because there are no barriers to entry, there are thousands of brands created every day, right? Really helping crystallize what is that unique value proposition. What do you see that you're committed to and driving every day? So I can't tell, Rich what needs to be done with Shea Moisture, but my role is to understand what does he really believe needs to be done, and then what can I help shape. How can I help carve out and ask questions to make sure that's unique and compelling? And then how can I help bring that to life? So the short answer for me is the magic is in the founder. Despite everything that is around you that might say it somewhere else, the magic is in the founder.
Yeah, I love that. That's sort of like staying true to your vision and your gut and getting all the advice, but sticking to your gut and your value proposition.
Can I just build one thing?
Yeah.
I would echo that. I saw your leadership at Cannes, and all the founders were up there talking and sharing their story. And so I think even after being acquired or a part of this really big company, that clarity of perspective, they still have that. That doesn't go away, and I think that's the thing that continues to give them the resiliency and the staying power, whether they were small in the thing that led them to starting out or after joining a big organization, it's still that clarity that separates them.
Thank you. Shannon Washington is SVP Creative Director at Deutsch LA, a creative founder and a mentor. She's worked at some of the country's most respected ad agencies. She's co-founded San Francisco's Young Auxiliary Group of the Museum of the African Diaspora, contributed to Parlor, a global travel and lifestyle destination for Black women, and created... Oh, you founded it too. Oh my God. Seeing the contributed and founded. And also founded Feminist Enough, a storytelling platform for women of color and mentoring, and has mentored a lot of rising entrepreneurs.
I.e. badass.
Just again, like just a few things here. And all the while creating award-winning campaigns from Pantene's Breakthrough Social First, Pro-Social Shine Strong campaign, Remember the Not Sorry, or Sorry Not Sorry campaign, and CoverGirl's Beauty Busting, Ideal Busting campaign, I Am What I Make Up. As well as also a lot of work for Chase and HR, so a lot of diversity, HR Block. So one of the things that we talked about with the with the CoverGirl campaign, it's really about blending in, and importantly, a lot of the role of marketing is to help people stand out, their businesses stand out. So tell me how you really think about Millennial Pink and the role of visual branding in helping you stand out.
Well, I love PMS 064. That's the actual technical color of Millennial Pink, I think. What was the second part of that question?
The role of visual branding in
Oh, wow.
helping you stand out.
That's another loaded question.
The sort of
Be here all day.
we were talking about with Lola and
Yeah, visual branding is extremely important, especially in 2019 and beyond, when we have so many more visual platforms for you to market on. You know, one of the things that I get a lot is when someone says, I have a brand, they have a logo. That's not a brand. But a big part of that is really, really investing in how you do want to be visually identified, and what does that mean? Isi mentioned something called love marks, which is something that we use, and it's a larger kind of emotionally led term to describe a brand that has essentially become a place in your life and a place of love. But a lot of that starts with visuals and how people recognize you. Because we have platforms like Instagram, like, Facebook, and everyone has a video camera, and you can pretty much, kind of create everything. One thing that I'm seeing right now that we spoke about is resisting the urge to kind of like homogenize in the sense of style. I mean, for the sake of style. I give you a good example. Depending on how old you are or how much you love luxury and beauty, you know what the YSL logo looks like. You know what Cartier looks like. You know what Louis Vuitton looks like. These are invested marks, what we call in my era, and they have heritage. Recently, a friend of mine did a bit of a kind of like a quick study on how a lot of these brands are migrating to these new visual marks, and they're sans serif. That means they're a very simple font. It's black, white, and stark. And so what ends up happening is that they lose a little bit of their character. And people, you would be surprised how much people really identify with that. That's why when, I still get hit up to do logos. And I'm like, I have no time to do. But I started as a designer in my career almost 16, 17 years ago. And we would do these studies, and people would say, it's just like, just putting stuff together. And I'm like, no, there's a whole science to it. There's a full science in the colors that you use, and, how you essentially want to be associated visually, and what does that mean? The example that we were talking about was in the new feminine care space. One thing that I'm noticing is, like I was talking about with luxury marks, everyone is starting to look alike. It's always a very muted, almost very neutral palette. It is very almost like vintagey, but very simplistic type font. And the photography is extremely symbolic. And you have brands like Thinx, which did an amazing campaign that came out with that. And then you have brands that are like, kind of just doing what they're doing in different colors. And what ends up happening, because we are visual creatures, is that they become one in the same circle. There's nothing to set you apart. I'm not talking about colors and, just fonts, but when you put everything together, what does that not only that say about you, but how are you going to be recognized? And, the person who says, I don't know what any of these do, but I like the look of that. That looks like me. That's what you want to get to, and you're not going to do that if you're trying to look like someone else.
Exactly, sort of not following the pack, but finding your Heart and soul. And then Sadira Furlow is Chief Marketing Officer for Pepsi North America Nutrition. She oversees all marketing and growth innovation across Quaker, Tropicana, Naked, and Kavita, playing a major role in leading PepsiCo into a healthier future. She started her career in advertising, running accounts such as Miller Coors, Verizon, and Sprite, always with a focus on celebrating consumers and impacting culture. And she's been at Pepsi. She joined 3 years ago as an external hire in a director role and has been promoted in as many times. She has since then been instrumental in launching LifeWater, breaking the internet with the Puppy Monkey Baby ads for Mountain Dew, which we all remember, and overseeing We Are Blood, Mountain Dew's first feature-length film about skateboard culture across the globe. One of the things that Pepsi does quite a lot of is influencer marketing, and one of the things you and I talked about was sort of the importance of finding a credible influencer, and again, sort of not following the pack, but really what makes a credible influencer to you? And you guys all talk about these things so succinctly the other day. In terms of the whole walking into the room analogy was
Yeah,
really
I think, most of you all are, how many of you all are on Instagram, just by show of hands, right? So you're probably following someone that a brand is paying as an influencer. And so you've got to look at, I think what we've seen on the marketing side is this thing called influencer marketing going from a very tactical thing or just a new way of doing word of mouth to what I would say is a real strategic tool within the marketing toolbox. And there's a lot that is out there in terms of influencer marketing fraud. So you have to be really mindful as you're building your business. I think, what I see with a lot of young entrepreneurs in, not age, but in the stage of where they're at is, I want to go find an influencer. Who's someone that can put the brand on and pay them, and they start looking at number of followers. And I think what we've seen is you've got to move beyond that as scale. That's just reaching people. That doesn't mean that it's going to be relevant. And as you're building your brand, it's like that adage, like you are the company that you keep. And so you've got to be really mindful as you're curating that group of key opinion leaders within your sphere. And they may not be on Instagram, but who are the people that can walk your brand into rooms that you can't get in on your own? How are you borrowing their equity as a way to build credibility for what you're selling in a product or service?
Thanks, that's great. And it's sort of that analogy of like, that person is walking you into the room and introducing you, and how can they best represent you?
And in
Amazing.
all of this, you still, the fundamental is knowing who you are. Yeah. Because you don't want to walk into the room when you're trying to drive awareness and you're overwhelmed by the person that you're walking into the room with. So what you want is the person that you're walking into the room with to amplify who you are. And it's so easy today, and it's in the point that she was making about visual identity, to kind of follow the mainstream and the norm. And the most important thing you can do is be clear on who you are and be true to that in all areas, including how you leverage an influencer, including your visual identity. And I'm not seeing that. I think that's where you can really stand out.
I also think that, a lot of brands don't look at themselves as influencers and use that language and understand that that's how they're being consumed. The lines have been so blurred that they almost don't exist anymore. And so it's not like, you get a lot of briefs. I'm sorry, you guys may not get a lot of briefs. I get a lot of briefs. Where it's, we're going to do this with this person, but then the brand is going to talk like this. I just built a character for H&R Block right now. And, when we were creating her, it was the brand says this, but she says this. But to the consumer, it's all the same thing. And so just as much as you're investing in that language and how you want this person to represent you, you have to align with that as well and realize that you're going to be perceived pretty much in the same realm too.
Can you hit that? That's my just fun fact about me, 333 daily reminder to be a blessing to someone.
I thought I knew what it was. I thought it was going to be your workout.
So if I have not in my day, that is my reminder that there's still time to be a blessing to someone.
I think you've done it.
Yeah.
I think you've done it.
And I think you're spreading the blessing. Everybody's a blessing on the panel.
On the influencer thing, because I do think it's probably it's an easy route if you use it right to amplify your brand. And some examples that come to mind, I'm not saying good or bad, but just examples of them, like the world didn't need another tea, but look at Tummy Tea. The world did not need another fashion brand, Fashion Nova. World didn't need another eyeglass brand, Warby Parker. And so you're seeing a lot of disruption in this space, and I think there are examples out there of when you use influencers in the right way that it can really help, but also if you use too many, that it takes over your brand. And just finding that right balance for yourself as you think about that.
I think balance was a thing we talked about a lot, about sort of balancing, we've all talked about, like, there's lower barriers of entry. There's so many tools out there. There's so many new brands out there. So in terms of that sort of, and I think a lot of founders are coming into this without formal marketing training and sort of maybe overwhelmed by, like, even where to start. What would you say is sort of the fundamental best place to start when you're thinking about starting your marketing plans?
Who are you talking to? It's your audience. Just that is essentially the apex of everything that you are doing, is understanding who your audience is, understanding who they are now, but most importantly, who are they going to be in 5 years? One thing that I see a lot from my end of the stick is you constantly get briefs where they're a bit of a pivot, where it's like, this is where we were 5 years ago, but this is where we are now, and this consumer is aging out. So how do we get to this new consumer? That brief has probably come across my desk maybe like 4,000 times, I want to say. And, I wasn't at a place to really affect those and have one-to-one conversations with people at the C-suite on my client level. But now that I am now, one thing that I like to, partner with my clients and say, I don't want that brief to come from you in the next few years. I want you to understand how to scale your marketing to talk to who you want to talk to now, but also realize that your audience may change and it may evolve and it may get older, and you may be thinking you're talking to Black women, and in 4 years you're talking to Asian men. It can happen depending on what you're doing and who picks up something, and realizing that you're kind of at service to that, depending on what the makeup of your brand is. And you have to learn how to kind of let go. And depending on, again, what your product is, let your audience lead you for the number one for me.
I can jump in and, just take a bit of a tangent. I have zero formal marketing training. I went to school to be a doctor. I accidentally ended up in advertising as something to do, and was doing my post-baccalaureate credits to then apply to med school, and no one tells you have no life when you start out in advertising. And so I pulled back from that and, have stayed in advertising. And I share that because I am a chief marketing officer at PepsiCo. I don't have an MBA. I'm not a formally trained marketer. And I share that because you don't need that to be great at the things that have helped me to achieve this success. Is I've always been curious. Never stop asking questions. Never stop wanting to understand human behavior. We call it consumer and customer empathy, but understanding human behavior and solving problems. So how is your brand, product, service solving a problem for the person you're trying to talk to? It's not about being different, but distinctive. What is the utility that you are going to bring to their life? And then second, when I think about all the marketing tools out there, the best, I think, piece of advice I could give, regardless of what stage you are at, is pick the tool based on your goal. If you are trying to drive sales, then you should look at the marketing tools, sales funnels, conversion that are going to do that. If you need awareness, there are specific marketing tools to help you do that. And you cannot do 5, 10, 12 things at the same time. Be really simple and focus on what you're trying to achieve, and then pick the right tools to help you achieve that.
I want to say ditto. Similarly in background, I didn't train as a marketing person at all. I studied engineering, and I happened into it. But all that aside, the marketing rules are being rewritten, and they're largely set by people like you. So big companies are trying to figure out how to do more of what people naturally, who have instinct and passion, know how to do. So again, I think it's my message is always, founders, be careful of thinking there's a solution in some big company that is really going to help, because I flip it on the other side and say, we don't know, okay? That being said, there are some fundamental principles of things that are important to do. And what you need in this point that was in the last panel and that she mentioned is it is really important to know what stage you're in and what you need, because sometimes it's not. And while this panel is about marketing, depending on what your objective is, how you are going to reach and be of service to your consumer and then scale it up will look very different. And a lot of times what I find in the beginning when you're starting, it is less even about how you think about the consumer. It is almost as much as what you do with your retail partner. And how with your retail partner you figure out how you're going to drive awareness to their shoppers and that you work together to do that. And then you move to a larger scale when you've got broad distribution. If your goal is to be in brick and mortar retail, then you're figuring out with that broad distribution how you cut through and then you reach at a whole nother different level to a group of consumers. So I do think it's super important to know your stage, because the tool that you will use will that matters, right? Because if not, you can't do everything. And then the last one that I would say is a new skill for everyone is what people are loosely calling kind of data-driven marketing, if such a thing. Really being mindful of what you're getting out of your marketing investment. And big companies have sometimes gotten lazy with that, but I think as founders, you really can't afford to be. So really being a student in what's working and what the impact is, and doing more of what is working and less of what isn't, but still not being afraid to try new things so you can figure out what is going to work to deliver the objective that you're setting out to reach.
That data is a competitive advantage, and it is out there. There are ways to get it, and having that will allow you to build the empathy and intimacy needed to, what I'd say, create this optimized value loop. The more you understand, the more you're able to keep delivering more of the good and find efficiency in like not doing the stuff that isn't working. And that's something that big companies are struggling with, because we are so big and we have so many consumers and there is so much data. We can't even figure out what to do with it all at one point in time. But that's where the business disruption is coming, particularly in CPG. We are getting our butts kicked by the smaller emerging brands that have established a direct-to-consumer relationship, and they're winning because they understand their audiences better than we do. And so use the data to help accelerate and propel your businesses forward. That's going to be your competitive advantage. No one can know your audience better than you can.
And I'm sorry, just to add to that, very often that access to that data, if you don't go deep enough, you'll think that you can't find it, or you'll just go like, oh, these are like my basic metrics. There are so many tools out there available to entrepreneurs, especially, that you may think, and they may say you have to come to an agency, you have to come to someone, you can come to me, but someone like me in order to get that, and you have to pay a price for it. That is not true. There are so many ways to get really, really, really deep, but you have to understand what it means, and you have to be willing to make some very small investments to access that on its own, because Google and Facebook and all these companies will come to us because they know what we're going to do with it. But I always tell them, as much as you're talking to me, you need to be giving the same tools that you make available to agencies for free to entrepreneurs, because you can do actually more with it.
And one of the things we talked about was, like you've even said, there's so much data out there. And we talked about using data to create a more intimate relationship with your consumer, your humans. How do you create that intimacy through data? Or what are some of the best tools that you come to mind for you guys?
I only know big company tools that we're using, and not an expert, but I think like understanding some simple things like, why are people buying you? Who's buying you one time? Who bought you a second time, and why didn't that person buy you a second time? Like anything, I think just data collection as you're building your brand. Are you surveying? Are there forms you're having folks fill out to get on a newsletter? So what type of data capture do you have? Email address, gender, what are your interests, so you better understand that audience. So I think that's a simple thing to start with is what are you capturing and collecting, and then how will you use that or tie that to purchase? So then you can paint a picture of where you should lean in or where you're going to optimize.
There's soft data and there's hard data. And I think most important is soft data. That's where you start, because it helps you with what to do with the hard data. And in soft data, and where I see the difference in the smaller businesses that we work with, and the more entrepreneurial ones, there is such an intimate connection when you know the name of the person and the variant of product they used and what occasion they used it in, and if the scent worked for them or how many times they comb their hair, and the level of insight you get from that is so rich. And that is what you don't see big companies have, that level of intimacy. And that was your first question on intimacy. So that's the soft data. And it's using every interaction. And so, yes, it could be a social post, but it could be an event. It could be talking to a person that's in the store. Some of this stuff is so basic and obvious, but you'd be surprised at how rich it can be. Because usually what you hear from one person, there can be, hundreds of thousands of people behind that or provoke something. So the soft data, I think, is probably foundational. Then the hard data, there's so much of it, and this is what can be blinding. The most important hard data is about figuring out the impact of what you're investing in. And usually it's first to driving to purchase, and then as she pointed out, it's to repurchase. And then the second is how not just the impact of purchase, it is your attitude or connection to that brand or item that you're buying. And there's tons of metrics on that, on how much you share. I mean, there's so much in that, but that's the data that really, really matters, because then you can optimize that and figure out. What you'll find is it depends. It depends on where you were, who you're talking to, the impact, and you'll find some sorts of content and some sorts of retailer partnerships or alliances work way better than others among this group. And so the more you can dissect that and then tie that to your mission of what you're trying to accomplish, you can drive much more impact and efficiency in your plan than if you haven't done that. So I'd mind the soft and the hard sides of the data.
That's really important, because to understand the relationship that I have, not personally, but to these women, I am of service to them. And so we are partners in a sense, and I, with my team, essentially bring to life these big ideas. That's a very lazy way to talk about it, but a big part of the success that we have together is with that hard and soft data and helping us navigate where to take things and also where not to take things. How to have hard and soft conversations with audiences and understand what are things that we are missing, what are opportunities, audiences that we are missing, and how to also really choose how you want to market. That's really important, because there's no one here from my agency. We will take your money. We will. If you do not if you do not have a really, really, really good understanding, there are companies out there, there are people, whether they're large or small, that will come in and say, I can save you, I can help you do this, I can help you do that. And personally, I think they're like just new generation snake oil salesmen, because it's not as simple as that right now. And you have to have a love for it. And coming to me with an idea is great. Coming to me with data, so I can come find something for you and say, okay, based on this, let's put together a plan that looks like this and make it tailored for you. You are setting yourself up not only for marketing success, but also for just knowing what to avoid when it comes to bringing your campaign to market.
That's great.
Can I add one? I know.
Yes,
we need
and
to-
then we'll open it up to questions, but yes.
I would encourage you, each of you, and challenge you as well to do some reflection when you leave and think about the relationship from a philosophy standpoint that you have with data. Is it something that kind of scares you, or is it something that excites you? Related to the previous panel, that may be a gap where you need someone with more analytical rigor to come in and help support you, because that's going to be so key. That's not going to go away. And there's plenty of classes and tools out there to better understand it. And that is something on, the big corporations. A lot of marketers in a traditional sense are not comfortable with the amount of data out there, or over-reliant on whether it's agencies or the analytics team, and don't know how to mine it for insights. So if you recognize that's something that either your business isn't founded on, or something you value, or that's going to be a part of your philosophy, that may limit your potential and how you're able to grow. So I would encourage you all to reflect on that and how you might move forward differently with that.
Thank you. I know there must be lots of questions, so let's open it up. Do we have, are you handing out the?
Thank you.
Look, I come from the agency side. I'm not.
Hello, my name is Asmao Ahmed. I'm the founder of Plum Perfect, and I'm one of those people that data excites me. And I wish that I had kind of heard this panel a long time ago, because I think it would have inspired a lot of how I did things. But my company was essentially based on data. If I was speaking to investors or to retailers, I would position us as a data company, because what we did was that we tracked every single thing our consumer used, from the way she looked to why she bought beauty products to occasion, everything. And then we used the hat data to kind of help scale that. But my question to you is, a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of we have two customers. We have the retailers and we have the end customer. And our messaging to each customer is quite different. So in the case of a certain product that we built at Plum Perfect called Beauty TV, it was very influencer-based. They were our customers because we're using their videos and personalizing them for the audience views. But then I also needed the retailers to subscribe to that. And my messaging for the influencers was essentially, they wanted to know how they were going to get a cut of whatever we made. That was their primary goal. And then to the retailers we were speaking to, they wanted primarily to make money. There was very little discussion around data, right? So I recently exited Plum Perfect, and I think that if I had sold it as a data company, I would have made, and which is where I ultimately in my gut felt the value was, it would have been a completely different conversation than the ones I've been having. So my question is, how do entrepreneurs here that are going through the same challenge, and I know some of us in this room are going through this challenge right now, kind of balance the messaging between consumers and retailers? And how do we get in front of the retailers and potentially strategic partners that may be acquirers of our company to understand the core value of data?
I would say most of us have to deal with that balance of consumer and customer. You know, what I'd like to say about data, use the data to demonstrate the value of what you're bringing or quantifying the impact that you're bringing. So to that retailer, you're able to use that data of like, sorry, if you just
Another
hit,
blessing. It's
right?
another blessing.
If you hit stop, yeah. To use the data like, hey, I can tell you I have increased your store traffic by X amount. By better understanding this group of people, I'm able to increase your basket ring. Or for the influencers, I know you want this cup, but let's look at something like if you are able to drive X amount of engagement, or I can understand how I can quantify the impact of your influence. Your influence led to X amount of conversion or in sales, and I'm willing, if you hit that, to give you X percent. So like, use the data as your way of creating conversations around value, whether it's something, the value you're bringing, or the value you're going to get in return for something that you've done. I think that could be a way to frame up the messaging with data at the center of it.
The issue you're talking about is real. There's a few other things that I would add. One is, don't give up your data.
Yeah.
Data is currency. The retailers are seeing this, and they are now monetizing their data. So no matter how desperate you are, as much as you can, hold on to your data. Okay? That's brilliant. Hold on, because it is currency. Number two, the ability to influence retailers with data is going to depend on the scale that you have and leverage. So your question depends on how big and influential you are. Without that, you sometimes have to start first with the retailer, okay? And then you broaden into, once you've got scale and influence, on how you can shift that retailer based on what your end consumer wants. That just is kind of a practical reality. When we're working in these big companies and big businesses, we have so much more leverage that we're able to bring the data to the party. And there's still a challenge because our data and their data, and what does it say and what they share. So those are the two I think early on, you almost have to be customer or retailer first if your mission is to scale up. and then work to make, and I know that's counterintuitive because we all hear consumer first, but if you're trying to scale up your business.
And what can you tell them about their shopper that they don't know through your data? And how in telling them something that they don't know is going to drive a different impact or outcome that they may not have been able to do without that information?
One more question. Okay, one more question? I saw somebody over here with that.
Yep, you.
Hello, my name is Asosi Gadar. I run Cosign. We make products within Images shoppable on social media and blog sites. One of the questions I have, thank you so much for this conversation. Very, very helpful. I have too many questions, but one of them is, when you guys are talking about brand, and as a young startup, I'm curious, like, when should I really care about that? Like, I feel like brands are built over time, and they're only really realized at almost when they're established, more so. Hey, just how my feelings.
I'm ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Because I feel like
Buzz, I got the answer.
I also feel like, you know, it in building my company, is that the most important thing? Am I just focused on the customer and making sure they're satisfied? Versus when I think about brand, it's an outward experience where you're more so marketing towards what this name is and what this represents, colors and all that, versus, you know, the other. And then the other piece is, what are some common mistakes that you see people make about brands?
This is real short. I
Take a deep breath.
Right, I'm like, no, I believe you are a brand from day one. Day one, it's not something you get to. If you look around at, particularly in the technology space, you've seen founders create products and services and then have the oh shit moment, I need to create a brand. That's a Uber, that's Lyft, there's plenty of examples out there. And it is so much harder to build something for utility and then get to the brand after the fact. Start thinking of yourself, Shannon said this, you are a brand from day one. All those other things, marketings, marks, design, those are all tangible assets that reflect your brand, but you should start thinking about your brand day one, today.
The one example that, I'm sorry,
One more answer.
somebody's gonna kill me. The one example that I like to give is, you're going to evolve. You're going to grow, you're going to change the look and feel of your company, the services of your company. But as long as you attach it to the name of that company, that brand stays for the most part. And so it's kind of like you have to think about it as two lanes on the highway. That slower lane, and it seems slower, actually has a lot of value because they are made up of very consistent elements, consistent core tenets of what you want to do. This fast lane is, you know, whether it's new products, R&D, all the things that you would do to change and get out there, launching new things, evolving your company, but that brand is your constant. And you'd be surprised, you can tell, Uber is a great example of what happens when you have to pivot so much because you don't have core brand values.
Airbnb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell this is something we're very passionate about. But I know that there also some passion. Oh, we can do it. I thought you were saying rap.
We don't want to leave.
Okay, cool. We got some sign language going on.
Here, just one
Okay.
thing on that last question, because, you know, for us as brand builders, the brand is fundamental, so we can't even imagine the concept. I mean, it's like you're like feeding like to the piranhas, like what? But at the same time, branding has to shift to be more people-centric. And so what happens in brand building, we can push out our brand message and hope that we land it somewhere. But the shift in the marketing model is make sure you're really clear on what people want, and then you're serving up your brand to deliver that. And as you do that, you still have to do that with your brand cues and clear about who your brand is. Because you're not just serving up a bunch of anything to what anybody wants. You're finding the intersection of what people want and what your brand values are. Because if you do the latter, it's just it's generic and not sustainable.
Okay, this is so important. Like, think beyond the product or service you're creating right now. Like, Apple's a great example. Like, they're not just an iPhone, they're not this, they're not, it's an ecosystem of things. And like, I imagine all of you all, because you're amazing founders, are very purpose driven. And so think of the business that you're in and beyond that, so you don't, either in your name or whatever you're creating, become anchored into this very narrow thing that then becomes a barrier for scaling and how you need to evolve as well.
I'm sorry.
We have so much to say.
Learn how to, if you choose to build a brand around yourself, really, really understand what that means. That is a huge, it can set up so many pitfalls, it can set up a lot of wins, and it's an investment that you're gonna have to make. And so a good example is, I was having a conversation last night with a public life and a private life, and being really, really careful with what you're saying and what you're projecting. Because of course, we all know someone that's like, my brand, my personal brand, and I'm like, okay, great. But if you're building your business around yourself, you are going to have to be on way more than you may want to. And so if your business is built like solely on you, take a second look and really, really be honest with yourself if you're willing to make that commitment, because you're gonna put yourself in a space you may not necessarily want to be in.
I'm Star, the founder and CEO of 4D Healthware, and we're a healthcare company. So a lot of times investors ask me, well, who's your customer? Well, I have more than one customer. I have the payer, I have the patient, I have the physician, I have the health system. And they say, no. You have one customer. Who do you sell to? Okay, well, I sell to the health system, but only because they own the patient's data. But my customer that my clinicians talk to is the patient. So that background is so that I can ask this question. When I'm thinking about my brand, I have a brand of trust, patient care that I deliver to my patients. It should be the same brand for my health system, but that's not what they're interested in. That's the truth. Their health system is not truly vested interest in the patient. But the truth is that they're interested in what is in it for me. What is my monetary benefit? What is my revenue benefit? What are the penalties I can, avoid because I utilize your service? So do I build two brands, or do I somehow try to merge the two?
You build one brand for your end consumer, and you create value for that intermediary, which is what we have to do all the time. Because while their interests are not always aligned, ultimately, that intermediary has to deal with patients regardless. So you create all of your brand design, your brand values, your brand proposition for the patients, or ultimately the end consumer, but you've got to create a value proposition out of that for your intermediary in order for that to be successful. But don't create two brands.
Alrighty. I think now we're on to
One
break.
more,
Is that
one
right,
more,
or-
one more.
She's not gonna put it.
It's all up to Dee.
We're like, D, one more.
Hi, my name is Tavana Evans. I'm the founder of Guapcoin. I just wanted to say one thing to her about when do you build your brand. You want to do it from day one, because somebody will steal it from you if you don't. And I've had that happen to me twice. And I'm a marketing professional. I mean, I've been in marketing for almost 20 years and was not thinking about the brand aspect of it. So you want to do that like immediately, because somebody will take your brand from you, and you'd be like, well, dag, So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. All right, I think that's it. This was amazing. There's just so much information. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.